Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Let's Get Vaccinated on HoodMed Chats, hosted with our partners at March for Science. Today, we are chatting abortion rights and all the issues surrounding the widespread bans that will probably be the death knell for abortion rights in the US, and what the slippery slope means for contraception access in the coming years. This is also our first podcast of 2023. So please allow us to reintroduce ourselves. I'm Dr. Nisi Hudson, Chair and Science Director of Hood Medicine Initiative. I'm a computational biologist and I have a BS in biology from MIT and an interdisciplinary PhD from the University of Louisville. I currently work in health equity research and public health communications, and I direct the research division and media group at Hood Medicine. And then with us today, we have Jonathan White. I'll let you introduce yourself.
How you doing, everybody? My name is Jonathan White. I am the Director of Policy Engagement for Hood Medicine Initiative. I am an attorney in the state of New Jersey. Pleasure to see everybody.
And then obviously we have the rest of our crew here. I'm thrilled to be kicking off this year with one of my best friends and big bro, Dolio Durant. He's also a Hood Medicine co-founder, and he serves as our resident hacker. He got his SB in mechanical engineering at MIT, and he works as a software developer and lead technical instructor at Zip Code Wilmington. He's also one of the lead MCs in the hip hop bluegrass group Gangster Grass. And if you haven't heard of them, please check them out right now at gangstergrass.com. Thank you for joining us, Dolio.
Good to be here. Good to be here.
And then we also have the pleasure of having Dr. Jay Stallings here with us. He's a board certified toxicologist. He's got 10 years of experience in drug development, and he serves as our environmental health justice director. He has a BS in chemistry and a PhD in pharmacology and toxicology from the University of Louisville. Go Cards. And he works with Hood Medicine to highlight vulnerable communities affected by climate change and environmental injustice. And he develops policy and community engagement strategies to provide resources and advocacy for local populations. So thank you for joining us, Jay.
Great. Happy to be here.
For those of you who don't know, Hood Medicine is a nonprofit collective of scientists, physicians, hackers, and assorted geeks focused on health equity and reducing the spread of mis and disinformation. And our Hood Med Chats podcast connects health experts and activists to bring real talk and mad science to our communities. Today, we are going to be talking about abortion rights. And so I thought we might just kick it off by throwing it all the way back to last summer when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in a landmark decision that signaled the Republicans' resounding success in their long game of stacking the bench across the nation and beginning to erode a lot of hard-won freedoms and civil rights from history's battles. This move essentially allowed states to make their own decisions on abortion, and they've wasted no time really banning it everywhere. As you can see, this is from the Center for Reproductive Rights. This basically shows you which states it's banned in. It's mostly red states, obviously. And right now, in most of these states, the punishment would be multiple years in prison with no exceptions for rape or incest. And in some of the states, not even for medical emergencies. So I thought maybe before we got into the various aspects of how these bans will reverberate throughout history, maybe we'd like to go around and quickly get everyone's sort of opening thoughts on how the erosion of abortion rights has changed their perspectives on America and our jankety healthcare and justice system. So, Delia, why don't you kick it off?
I don't know. It's not like, for me, it's I've been acquainted with the way the criminal justice system and the way healthcare system works in this country for long enough to where it's not surprising at all, because I've watched it incrementally move the needle backwards from just following history over the past 50 years or so. It should be a resounding alarm for all of those who were growing complacent and maybe if it's somewhat encouraging because it means that maybe people will finally start taking it serious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Dolio really said it well. It speaks to complacency. I think it's much easier to motivate a population who feels like they have lost something versus a population who feels safe and protected. And when Roe versus Wade came down in the 70s, the liberal movement felt very validated and sort of protected by the judicial system and this new validated right, whereas the conservative movement was very energized, and the explicit goal of a lot of groups that have been founded since then was to reverse that decision. Been just, I think, a lot more energy put into that effort than on the other side to maintain the right set forth in Roe versus Wade.
I think the craziest thing about, sorry, Shanice, I think the craziest thing about the decision in the Supreme Court is years ago, there was not this groundswell of conservative opposition to the right to privacy and medical decisions for anyone, particularly women. And we've seen how religion and the far right and evangelicals have sort of infused their personal and religious beliefs into political.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. He was on to something good. I felt it.
Right.
There we go.
Can you hear me? Oh, sorry about that. We believe for such a long time that this was sort of a sanctified right, that we had precedent in the United States Supreme Court. Every justice that's been nominated since Wade was brought down has agreed that it was set in stone and would never be touched. And we saw that, politics has gotten so strong that it's allowed people to sit in that seat and lie about their personal beliefs, and then take those personal beliefs and basically knock the American people over the head with it, through such a tragic decision. So I think it reminds us that we have to be very vigilant in protecting the rights that are given to us, because at any moment in time, people who don't have our best interests in mind can come into power and take anything away from us.
Totally. And I think at this point, we're going to try to bring in a medical perspective as well. We have Dr. Ijoma Opara with us today. She received her medical degree from Wayne State University School of Medicine, and she's currently a double board certified assistant professor of internal medicine and pediatrics there, as well as associate program director of the internal medicine and pediatrics residency and an attending physician. She's the founding director of their internal medical curriculum entitled Health, Equity, and Justice in Medicine, and co-founding director of Wayne State University's Global Health Alliance. And you can find her every weekend on Twitter Spaces, leading the Anti-Racism and Action Roundtable. So thank you for joining us. We were just going around and kind of giving our opening thoughts. So I guess from your perspective, can you talk to us about how abortion is obviously fundamental healthcare and part of family planning, family medicine, and kind of how this has impacted you as a practitioner?
Absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Perfect. And I can hear you all. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hudson. Great to meet you, Dolio, Jay, Jonathan, and of course, everyone out there in, cyber world. And I'm really honored to share space with these brilliant minds on this topic. And really from a holistic standpoint, through the lens of medicine and healthcare, reproductive health, and the full spectrum of it, of which abortion is one, truly is a human right, like starting from there. And when we're talking about abortion rights, and abortion as a service and as a care provision inside of the healthcare and public health system, it's not devoid of the rest of reproductive health and the rest of health in general. I think that's one of the things that gets missing for some folks in this conversation, is understanding that we're talking about health as a human right, reproductive health as a human right, and that these things are interconnected with all other aspects of health. It's related to mental health, it is related to social health, because it does play a role in women and families' ability to access resources to take care of themselves and their family. Now, most women that access abortion as part of their human right to health care have children already and have families already. And so being able to make these choices is critical to the person's ability to participate in all of their health care and, frankly, life decisions. And so, yes, it is a medical issue, and foundational to medical rights that affect all members of the family, regardless of if they have birthing capacity or not. It is part of accessing care that helps with in menopause. It's part of accessing care and that helps in bleeding concerns. It's part of accessing care that helps with menstruation in bleeding. It's part of accessing care that helps with hormone management for other healthcare concerns. This feeds into all aspects of health. So the holistic and integrated and robust, comprehensive nature of this issue cannot be understated when we're talking about health of the individual, health of families, and health of communities overall.
Yeah, and there's really slim support for abortion bans, which I think kind of underlines um, the danger that we see with the way that the Republicans are going about this in general, because it really does kind of mirror the way that they are trying to invalidate the popular vote, for example, in terms of the fact that only, nearly 6 in 10 Americans believe that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. But that doesn't really matter in this case, because we have a very slim minority who are sort of dictating and imposing everything kind of on this moral basis, purported moral basis. We'll talk more about that in a second. But I mean, Dolio, these efforts are being driven by right-wing extremists, basically, which, is basically in our civilization become the euphemism for modern day fascists, basically, that want to return to days when white supremacy was like the law of the land, which it might actually still be, but they purport these efforts to be about being pro-life, but that's a really hard sell considering that they have complete lack of regard for any substantive policies that could actually improve the lives of infants and children, or people in general for that matter. So what do you think is the real agenda for these collective efforts between the abortion bans, the bans on sex education, critical race theory? I mean, come on.
I mean, they pretty much stated what their agenda was. I mean, they've been stating it for the past 50 years. So everything that's happening right now is just all of those pieces lined up in place, so that they can basically just start pulling the levers of power in the directions that they want them to go. They already stated, they've been stating for 50 years they were going to try to overturn Roe v. Wade. Um, um, the critical race theory, with quotation marks here, because what they're actually banning is accurate American history, is just another slate on their agenda. Um, they're just knocking them down one by one. The thing is that if it was indeed an issue of being pro-life, then they would be, fully supportive of everything else that is supporting and life sustaining efforts. They don't really care about children once they are here. They don't
Yeah.
care about homeless children. They don't care about homeless adults. They don't care about veterans. They don't care about just the unhoused in general. They don't care about people who are living in poverty. Um, Mostly what they've been concerned about is trying to fleece as much of the taxpayers' money from the coffers to siphon them into the pockets of the ultra rich elites so that they can then take that money and then buy more politicians, buy judges, and then start doing basically turning the hands back the hands of the clock all the way back to Jim Crow in some cases, depending on what state you're in.
Yeah.
I mean, we already have seen, and that's the whole thing about precedent when it comes to the courts, is that unless it's codified in the Constitution of either the state government or the federal government, then if you have a corrupt Supreme Court, precedent has no say whatsoever.
Yeah.
And they've already decided that money is a person.
Oh no.
So once you've basically said that money is speech, then that's basically saying, okay, we can buy your government, we can buy your politicians, whoever we give money to will do what we say.
Yeah.
And the only way that it's really going to change is if that we get fully engaged in the political process. It was I'm not sure what the timetable is in every other state, but here in Pennsylvania, we just had elections last week. In Philadelphia, the numbers came in about 28% of eligible voters voted. Granted, it's a highly Democratic area, but still, it's primaries. You can't really complain about who makes it onto the slot if you didn't actually say, okay, this is the candidate I wanted to support. But it goes beyond just endorsing and voting for a candidate. You need to engage with the people who are making these decisions on your behalf.
Yeah.
You need to have your council person on speed dial. I do. Find out who they are.
Yeah.
And it's a shame that it takes such a dire crisis for people to start to get engaged and start to wake up about what's happening around them. But you don't want to start learning to swim while you're already drowning.
Yeah. Facts. Jay, like obviously you've been witness to a lot of my spirals about this topic, but it's and we're going to get into a lot more about the FDA and the medical abortion in a little bit, but just from a general perspective, it's almost like this is kind of like the reverse of how we treat marijuana, where it's like legal in some states but not legal on a federal level. So it's like, what are we looking at in terms of like our regulatory bodies and kind of invalidating their authority when it comes to medical abortion care?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is the way I see this particular case about mifepristone is part of a very broad legal strategy to, as Dolio sort of explained already, sort of roll back the clock. And it's a very concerted, conservative legal strategy, which is highly organized and highly effective. You got to admit, It's been very effective. And part of the sort of philosophy that it's putting into place is to weaken the federal government and to bring things back to the states. And so you'll hear a lot of times that this is a state's issue. States should decide. If you ask a politician, what's your position on X? Abortion, death penalty, whatever, education, the state should decide. And what that means is that we're going to weaken the authority of the federal government to make decisions and put that back to the states, because at this point, you alluded to the fact that a majority of people support the right to choice.
Yeah.
And the popular vote in the nation, in the general election, tends to swing left. But if you break it down to the state level, the Donald Trump path to the White House depended on individual states and those unique voting patterns. And so weakening the federal government by weakening these individual agencies or electing people to Congress who do not believe in the fundamental power and authority of Congress, Tea Party, for instance, really empowers the states on an individual level to make laws that would be much more extreme than you would ever get at the federal level. And as Dolio also mentioned, most people maybe pay attention to federal elections, but they don't pay much attention at the state level. And so you can get candidates elected at the state level who most of their constituents have never heard of, but they're much more extreme, and they get elected with 5% voter turnout, and they have a real impact on the policies of that state. So, you know, you asked me about broader implications for regulations. Federal regulatory agencies are really in a serious position here where they're facing significant challenges to their authority from all angles, from the judicial branch, from the legislative branch, from Congress, and also sometimes from an executive branch that also doesn't believe in their authority.
Yeah.
If you're Black or Hispanic in the state that already limits access to abortions, Dr. Upper, you're far more likely than white women to have one. Women of color in states with restrictive abortion laws often have limited access to health care, lack of choices for effective birth controls. Schools often have ineffective and inadequate sex education. So, how have these bans already impacted healthcare access, particularly to the disproportionate effects on BIPOC women, poor people, marginalized groups? Are we headed towards a return to unsafe back alley abortions for these unprotected states?
That's a great question, Jonathan. And you know, one thing that we say in the reproductive justice space is that abortion bans and the attack on abortion does not reduce the number of abortions. It just increases the number of unsafe abortions. So people are going to still access a form of abortion. The question is, will we still have a person at the end of it? Will we still have a living person at the end of it, or a person with terrible consequences on their fertility or their health, or just not being here, period, right? Not being alive, period. So it is indeed a rollback to that time of unsafe abortions that produce deaths or produce complications that significantly negatively impact the lives of these birthing people, their families, community, and society as a whole, which is indeed a scourge and a stain on a country such as the United States. I want to also provide this overall context that the United States, among similar income countries, right, or high industrialized countries, is last when it comes to maternal health, period, right? And what is driving that rank number is maternal health disparities. We can't have a conversation to the question, Jonathan, around abortion rights and access to reproductive health, right, without talking about reproduction in the state of reproduction in the US and the disparities around maternal health, maternal mortality, and infant health and infant mortality, and overall health and disparities, period. Where when you're Black in this country, being pregnant raises and you're Black and a birthing person in this country, being pregnant, almost every pregnant person, including myself, asks the question, will I survive this one?
Yeah, yeah.
And
I apologize. It's Opara, Dr. Opara.
I know. Thank you.
And when it comes to this question, people with means and resources don't have to worry about this, right? Because people who have the means and the resources, they can fly or drive to another state or country that
I mean,
provides
I
the
don't know.
service.
Serena Williams got a lot of money, and she still almost died on the operating table. I don't know.
Well,
So,
very,
so
very,
to
very true.
to your point, absolutely, that is very true. People with me, and so I like to say white birthing people with means and resources, because when you're black with means and resources, exactly like Serena Williams, like myself, like Dr. I believe it was Shanice Johnson, and a number of other black women who are well degreed, overeducated, hyper educated, not
Yeah.
over. You can be over educated, but you can be hyper educated, and well resourced. Once they find themselves within the healthcare system, there's a target on the back that has been structurally placed there by white supremacy. But I want to go back to pieces, because all of this is interconnected. What Dolio talked about, what Jay talked about, this has always been about power.
Yep.
Period. Always. And that's why, as Dr. Hudson talked about, these things are not happening by themselves independently. They are also concurrent with attacks on American history, world history, just basically the truth, called anti-CRT's attack on LGBTQIA, rights, and all the things that are going on, and anti-trans and anti-gay folks and anti-anyone that's not white, male, able-bodied, land-owning Christian. Okay, and it's all going back in time. All of that is for power. So no, they don't care about life or the living. They don't care. It's none of that. That's all narrative, right? When we know that pre-Civil War, and this also comes back to the whole federal and state rights thing, which we know this whole business with federal and states is out of slavery. There's really literally no policy in this country or law that you can't trace back to slavery. You know, and
Facts.
so when we recognize that connection pre-Civil War, half of the folks that were taking care of reproductive health in this country were basically black midwives. The other half was indigenous and white. So abortion has always, I think this is an important internalization for us, being part of like the reproductive and health and public health, even before those things were like formal fields. We now call them healthcare and public health, but the then healthcare infrastructure of the country normalized. It was after Civil Rights Act and numerous other sort of progressive acts that took place when it came to civil rights in this country that all of a sudden those white, male, able-bodied, Christian, landowning folks perceived these change as threats, and whatever effort they could take to then achieve power, all of a sudden abortion became that linchpin amongst others. The last quick thing I would say, because Brother Dolio mentioned about being active in the political process, which is an absolute yes and amen. The opposition also knows that, and that is why we don't have, like some countries, election day being a public holiday so everybody can go and vote and participate. That's why we have poor folks that have 5, 6 jobs and can't afford to take time off to go vote, or have the time to call the council person or the other or anybody else that's representative in their community. Unfortunately, the United States, what is supposed to be the bastion of so-called democracy, is not, but supposed to be, right? Is unfortunately the place where it is expensive and is a privilege to actually participate democratically. I can take time off and go vote because I have a kind of job that I can do that. I'm in charge of my hours and my time, right? I don't clock in and clock out. People can do that, but to do that to that single parent with 6 children and taking care of their mom and parent and other members of the community, the really foundation of our neighborhoods, that's a challenge. It's a privilege to participate in the political process, and by design.
For sure. And they're making it harder as we speak.
As we
And trust
speak.
me, I don't believe for a second that these death eaters are worried about preservation of human life, born or unborn. There's certainly a supremacist aspect to this that they've made no grand efforts to hide in terms of their rhetoric and propaganda. And if that's like not scary enough, there's some serious like data privacy issues at play as well, for those desperate enough to go around the system to find abortion care. how much harder is that going to be with privacy laws and data tracking? Like Dolio, like for example, they've written all these laws in terms of like the vigilantism that is built in that authorizes neighbor to report neighbor. There's already concerns around like period tracking apps, shopping records, other data that is accessible to authorities now that they've criminalized abortion seekers and doctors. So it's like, not to be conspiratorial, but aren't these the exact same steps that someone would take to kind of insidiously build the foundations of an even more authoritarian leaning society?
Yes, I mean the infrastructure is there. The thing that we often say in the field is that if you are utilizing a software product and it is free, you are the product.
You are the product.
Mm,
It is tracking everything you are doing, your every move, your every text you're sending, every message you're reading, your preferences, what you are purchasing, the things is that you don't even need to be explicitly um, seeking an abortion or seeking reproductive care, but just based upon your shopping habits, the data surrounding what it is you're purchasing and the things you're searching for to purchase, if they mimic the aggregate patterns of a of what a pregnant person would be looking for to purchase, you are already being categorized as a pregnant person.
yep.
So if you are, and plus it is also a GPS tracker, so it is also telling your provider where you are going. So it's not even about, you don't have to place a bug anywhere because everyone is carrying a surveillance device in their pocket now.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much. Pretty much. Dr. Opara, how have you and your colleagues personally dealt with the realities around the criminalization of providers with these abortion bans? Do you get the sense that there's resistance among the ranks of medical professionals like we're seeing in grassroots activism?
It's a great question, and it actually leads to, it's a great dovetail to the conversation around political process and engagement. I'm very blessed to be in the great state of Michigan. Okay, I'm sure you heard,
Yeah.
we really are the blue wave, so to speak. All levels of government blue in the midterm elections. Um, and what we had to do, as you know, we actually had a 1931 zombie law, so to speak, that was not really a trigger law, but a zombie law around abortion, that criminalizes abortion. And so we were able, by engaging in the political process, many of us, in partnership with our grassroots leaders in reproductive justice, to turn the tide on that and repeal the 1931 ban on abortion in Michigan, and not only that, but codify abortion as health and healthcare rights in state law. Pardon me. So that has helped a lot, But prior to that, while we were fighting the fight before we realized the victory, yes, there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear. A lot of, doctors in general tend to lean conservative. And so you had those realities, and then you had folks who, because of the very same forces that have brought us to where we are right now, where we have, folks that are ignorant of, civic realities and the political systems that govern and inform many of our everyday experiences and opportunities and options and choices and realities, often online, also participated in I call it the de-evolution of medicine and physicians, where physicians used to be, as old timer Dr. Virchow said in 1800s, the natural attorneys of the poor, and I say the natural attorneys of the marginalized or the disenfranchised. But through capitalism and the corporate story that
Yep.
Brother Dolio told us about, that has been eroded, so that, insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, other members of the healthcare ecosystem that tend to stay in the background, are really who again dictates a lot of these pieces. Organized medicine hasn't helped themselves with the AMA, the American Medical Association, unfortunately, being an arm of white supremacism historically. They are trying now to get it right. So shout out to the leaders in health equity, health justice, in the AMA that are doing great work, and really trying to move the needle of organized medicine. But that history is very, very recent and still haunts a lot of the pieces of what we're talking about here. So you have folks that were scared, you had folks that were clapping, applauding the opposite direction, that luckily we didn't go in that direction. And we had folks that were confused because, again, doctors are not trained to be advocates. This is something that I was born into, and have exposed myself to the people and learn and continue to learn at the feet of the people, grassroots people, and being an organizer. That was before medicine for me, and so I infused medicine with this. But that's not the training. That's not the mindset, the approach. Really, medicine now these days, separate from our historical what we're supposed to have inherited. But as a Black physician, we don't have no choice but to be activists and advocates. And so that's what we do. So I would say, Jonathan, that we're very fortunate here in Michigan, and that those of us that do participate in the political process and have the privilege to do so, right, we're able to collectively bring about the change that we have so that we are protected. But our colleagues in many other states, not so much. And folks are coming to Michigan to learn how it was done and in what ways we can support them. But it is definitely a mixed bag. And my heart goes out, to all my colleagues that are trying to do good work, but are stifled. But again, that's the call to action that we as physicians, we have to take back that original mantle of advocacy. And not just kind of think that none of all the politics is out there. I have colleagues that talk about keep politics out of medicine. I'm like, dude, medicine is political. What are you talking about?
Always has been.
It always has been. Again,
we've codified racism in the U.S. based on medicine experimentation. Period.
Come on, man. But when they don't know, when they're out here banning books and banning everything else, how do you know this? You just wake up and be like, well, just here to help people. Okay, yes, and a whole other thing. So those would be some of my comments. And, I again, just really shout out to my colleagues in other states that don't have the same experience, unfortunately.
Following up on that and sort of connecting it back to some of the commentary, some of the fabulous commentary you made earlier about the disparities when it comes to maternal health for, Black birthing women. Historically, we've had doulas and midwives in the Black community who have sort of filled that gap, right? To offer, very personalized and care-driven, medical assistance for women giving birth. Can you talk a little bit about, the danger that those folks are in now with these efforts to ban abortion? And, are they worried or concerned about their livelihood as we see, physicians taking a more conservative stance with offering services because they're afraid that they may fall within, those new laws that are being passed in states across the country?
Right. And those are the people that physicians need to learn from at their feet. And so, far be it for me to speak on their behalf, because we have very, amazing doulas and midwives that have, again, always led this work of reproductive justice. And so I want to always just acknowledge and shout them out as the Black and Indigenous women that are no joke when it comes to reproductive justice. A lot of them midwives, doulas, etc. So yes, they are absolutely part of this, ecosystem. But I would say that they are probably leading with more courage and commitment than the rest of folks, because I think all their work is steeped in courage and their closeness and intimacy with their clients and patients cause them to indeed just move differently, in this space. But they're absolutely also at risk, like all abortion providers in these areas where it's illegal are absolutely placed at risk. But it's important to name our midwives and doulas who carry a lot in holistic ways, because it's not, like you said, it's not just the medical piece, but they're also, they know how many other kids the family has. They're helping with food security, they're helping with housing, they're helping with mental health. It's a holistic approach. They are vital central piece to the healthcare period, and certainly reproductive health. And they need to be protected at all costs. They are a true asset. And so we have to name that, and again, follow their lead in these conversations as we move towards what the solutions are for dismantling the unjust structures and systems inside of white supremacism and patriarchy that result in what we're seeing today.
Amen.
So, like, in addition to banning abortion procedures, last month the Supreme Court had to halt Texas U.S. District Judge Matthew Kacsmarik's ruling to withdraw the FDA's approval for mifepristone, the first drug used in medical abortion, 23 years after it was first approved. So this is, this kind of mirrors the abortion ban map, but this is where this drug is approved and banned based on all the new laws. So, Jay, we really need to look at this from a regulatory perspective as well. Like, can you start, first of all, by just quickly explaining the purpose of the FDA and what they actually have purview over?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is, as we discussed, so many of these efforts are really targeted at the fundamentals of our government and how it works. So the FDA is a federal agency, so it's a part of this. It has authority over the activities across all 50 states. It's a part of the executive branch, so the FDA is responsible for enforcing laws, as opposed to the judicial branch, like the Supreme Court and Judge Kacsmarik. The judicial branch is responsible for interpreting the laws, and then Congress, I won't editorialize on Congress, everybody does that, but Congress is supposed to make laws, So the FDA is responsible for enforcing laws about regulation of a huge number of products. Actually, it's not just drugs. It does include drugs, everything that you get a prescription for, and everything that's over the counter at the pharmacy, from Tylenol to Flonase and everything else. They also regulate animal drugs, everything from the veterinarian, medical devices, tobacco products, cosmetics, everything that goes in our food supply, everything you put on your face, all your body lotion. They have an enormous scope. It's a huge federal agency, 18,000 employees across the country, $6.5 billion annual budget. So it's a big agency with a huge mandate written into law by Congress to regulate all these things. And the purpose of this agency is to keep the American people safe.
Yeah. And like, this is the first time in history that a court has actually claimed the authority to just single-handedly pull a drug from the market, which is a power that the courts do not, in fact, have. Before we get into that, it's time for a quick science break to explain exactly what mifepristone does. So mifepristone is one of like two medicines that you have to take for medical abortion. The other one is misoprostol. So we'll first look at the difference between this drug and Plan B. So as we all hopefully know, eggs are stored in the ovaries, but they're only viable for up to like 24 hours from their release. And fertilization can only happen in that time frame. So a sperm has to be present in the fallopian tube during that window in order to fertilize the eggs. But sperm can live in the reproductive tract for up to 5 days. So having unprotected sex at any time during that 6-day fertile window, 5 days before and on the ovulation day, can potentially result in fertilization. And that's just sex ed 101, which we are going to stop teaching to the children, apparently. So Plan B actually kind of helps delay ovulation so that sperm and egg can't meet. So you can take the so-called morning after pill up to 5 days after unprotected sex before pregnancy has a chance to happen. But morning after after pills don't cause if you're already pregnant. So this is like kind of the fundamental difference between the drug they're trying to ban and like this over-the-counter Plan B. So there's one type that you need a prescription for. It works the same way as Plan B, but it's more effective, especially for people that weigh over 165 pounds, because we've talked a lot about how Plan B isn't necessarily as effective. But when we're talking about mifepristone, which is the drug that they tried to ban, it blocks a hormone called progesterone that's needed for a pregnancy to continue. So then when it's used in conjunction with misoprostol, it ends the pregnancy through 10 weeks gestation. So you block the progesterone first, it ends the pregnancy, then you take the second drug, which causes contractions that then expels the embryo from your uterus. And so these medicines are actually what they refer to as abortion pills. And they have been a safe way to have abortion for the past 2 decades. So it's insane that they're trying to ban them now. So I guess, in terms of like the potential negative outcomes of a federal ban, Jay, I mean, what are like the wider implications there?
Yeah, the implications are significant and really unprecedented. As you already said, this is the first time any court has overturned an FDA approval. It is remarkable. I work on FDA regulated products every day, and I can't fathom that this would work. I mean, it's some one of our viewers said it feels like you're in the Twilight Zone. It's just unbelievable. So if you think about real world implications of this, just about FDA and drugs, what could this do? This could definitely, if you take away mifepristone and the first drug in this 2-drug combination for medication abortion, you could definitely see increased surgical abortions, which comes with the risk of increased complications. You could also obviously see decreased access because surgical abortions are much more tightly regulated from state to state. So decreased access obviously could lead to very unsafe medical practices. As Dr. Opara already said, you don't decrease the number of abortions, you increase the number of unsafe abortions. So as we move people away from medication abortions, we move them closer to unsafe surgical abortions. We could also see more medication abortions using misoprostol alone. That is also an option using a very high dose of that drug, but that also comes with a higher risk of complications. So the implications, just considering the drug itself and the FDA implications there of women's health, are extremely severe, and they all lead to negative outcomes.
Dr. Opara, through this attempted invalidation of its FDA approval, though this attempted invalidation of its FDA approval was temporarily thwarted, what's the actual impact to patients who have lost access to this safe and reliable early-term medical abortion option in states where abortion bans have been implemented?
Right, absolutely. Just pretty much Jay has outlined it beautifully. That it has had that decreased access, which again, when we try to control and ban, decrease access to whatever it might be, abortion, you don't really change the numbers of abortion. You actually just increase the likelihood of complications and negative outcomes like death and other, again, medical complications. The other piece that we don't talk about, I want to introduce the mental health piece, and also, again, the sort of negative impact on the political process overall. I mean, we have the idea of democracy. We don't have real democracy because, as Jay has really said, Dolly has said, everyone has said in this space, you know, majority of folks are in support of one thing, but the government be doing another. Like, you know, what is this disconnect? We see the same thing with firearms, right? And common sense gun laws. Majority of folks support common sense gun laws. That's not what we're seeing over here. So understanding this disconnect and this sort of like, you know, this oligarchy of folks with, you know, money and corporations that truly, you know, running things, and that's again a larger conversation. We see therefore the inequities widening further, like erosion of trust in your government to take care of you and your needs, and other people around that are supposed to be represented by government. So it's like, if the government is doing, does that mean that are they reflecting what my neighbor thinks about my ability to choose for myself and have access to good health and good health outcomes? And so there's this sort of like psychological, mental health, impact in sort of, you know, your trust in your community, society, government, and all these pieces. And again, your trust in the process, and going back to Dolio's call to action about being engaged in political process, we already established that that is a privilege. But for those that do want to or may be able to participate, there is hesitation because look at what the so-called, you know, government is doing. Even though it's a catch-22, it's like, well, but if you don't participate, then it's more likely other folks, you know, the will of other folks gets represented. And so it's a vicious cycle that can be quite, I think, traumatic. The whole thing is traumatic. You know, this is a traumatic place to be. The uncertainty. I remember when the decision, when Roe v. Wade was struck down, right? Dobbs v. Jackson was, you know, put in place. I remember asking myself, because we have 3 children, and I was thinking about, we were thinking of maybe having one, and I was just like, should we? You know, I'm 41. You know, anything can happen from a reproductive standpoint. You know, them eggs a little different. So at 41, so there were some challenges. What are my options? You know, so that it was burdensome. I remember sitting on the floor of my living room, staring into space for like an hour before a colleague called me to be like, girl, what did you hear? What's going on? I could just panic from a personal and professional and sort of communal standpoint. So just really thinking also through just the trauma, even though it was a temporary stay, but just that it happened, and just on the backs, like this back to back, you know, you got Roe v. Wade that eroded, then you got what's going on in your particular state, then you got this, you know, the Mifepristone deal. It's just like, stop, what is going on? I'm a person, can I decide about me? You don't even know me, you know. And it's very, very traumatizing. And so I think the mental health piece and the impact that it has on, while for some, yes, it invigorates us to get involved in political process, for some it's trauma. It's like, I don't want to go there because they don't care about me, and also, does it even really matter, you know, at the end of the day? And it's dangerous. This is the dangerous place to be as a society. It's a dangerous place to be as a society. So for those of us who can, we must continue to make all the noise, be engaged, participate to the fullest, and give the people that are counting on us, being daunted and discouraged and overwhelmed and fatigued, to not participate, in order for them to secure their power hoarding like efforts, give them a run for their money.
Yeah. You know, and like we mentioned previously, Dolio, there is like a sort of white supremacist fascist aspect to this, and the fact that, you know, a lot of their propaganda is about replacement theory and increasing births for white Americans. You know, it's not just about abortion right now. You know, what are your thoughts on that to start with?
Well, the key part of it is the idea of first, it was the idea of population control. The main argument against, you know, we start talking about immigration. the main argument against immigration is that there's no more room at the end, so to speak. Um, but at the same time, you're looking at labor shortages.
Mhm.
But the problem, their main problem when it comes to immigration, has to do with the projections about um, the, I guess, people of European descent becoming a minority um, when you collect all of the quote unquote minorities together within the country. So they feel as though they're being replaced um, by people who they deem as not, well, first it's they first deem that they're not as American, but really what they believe is that people who are not of European descent are not
Yeah.
human.
Right.
Yes.
So
Facts.
That's
Right.
so
But let that sit for a minute,
right,
right? Like this isn't about like them not wanting us to be the Little Mermaid or in Star Wars or whatever. They don't want us to be alive.
right.
Period.
So they're rallying against things like, because it's not just abortion, it's also contraceptive care, and birth control that they're trying to go at. That's the next thing on the slate.
Uh-oh.
They want you to not be able to control when you have children, because it plays two roles. One is that it removes um, viable socioeconomic and political power from more than half of the population when you're talking about women, because the women are more than half of the population, you know. And if they are active participants in society, it poses a threat to patriarchy. And patriarchy is a key component of white supremacy.
right.
So you're disempowering women in general.
Mm.
You're also disempowering women who are being abused and have no control over their reproductive activity. You're talking about also children who are victims of molestation and incest.
Exactly.
Because in
Yeah.
these same states where they're banning abortion, they're also now putting laws in place to where, like, okay, we have an exception for incest and rape, but now we need physical documentation of this abuse and incest. Who are you going to get it from if you are being abused by your parents
But these
or
are
Right.
the same
a
states that
family
haven't.
member, or
Yeah.
you're a priest, or you're a teacher?
Exactly. But these same
Um,
states haven't lifted their statutory rape law. They haven't adjusted their statutory rape laws in decades.
right. I
I
mean,
mean,
these are
people
also the
bring this
same
shit all the time.
states. Yeah, these are also the same states who are trying to roll back child labor laws.
Yep.
Mm.
They do not care
Because
about the children. I mean, come on. This isn't pro-life. This
right,
isn't a pro-life discussion.
right, and that is what keeps this hierarchy in place.
Right.
And the more people who are empowered, the more people can what's the word I'm looking for can start to take this power structure down and
Mhm.
rebuild it into a more just society, a more equitable society.
Dolio,
And
when the new Supreme Court decision came down, I wrote a tweet, and the tweet said, uh, well, actually, when the new SCOTUS decision was leaked, I wrote a tweet, and it said, "This SCOTUS predecision on Roe should be a lesson to every Black, brown, queer, or differently abled millennial and Gen Alpha, which most civil rights era folks already knew. Every right you enjoy can be stripped from you without a moment's notice when apathy and disengagement win. Talk to us about the other rights that we have that are based on the fundamental theory behind the right to privacy through abortion. From contraception in Griswold to same-sex relationships in Lawrence to same-sex marriage in sorry, I always get this one. Obergefell.
Yes.
Right. Are those also areas that we're going to see at risk moving forward?
yeah, Loving v. Virginia, Brown versus Board of
Yep.
Education. These are all things.
Yep.
These are all fundamental rights that we take for granted, but that are only in place because of Supreme Court precedent, not codified in law. And right now we have a court that has been bought and paid for.
Right.
Yep.
Literally.
Even the benches is
Literally.
sacred. The Supreme Court is completely compromised as a balancing trifecta of our government. Period.
I
Right.
don't know if Loving v. Virginia would be at risk while Clarence Thomas and Jeannie doing their thing over there. So I think they might just hope that
They'll
one.
find an
No,
exception
no.
to that one.
Clarence,
I don't know.
Clarence,
He seems
I'm
to
a,
be very much for sale.
yeah, I'm
Yeah,
of the firm
yeah.
belief that he might see it as his only escape.
This-
Oh my God.
Um,
Oh
but
God.
I
but
don't know.
this,
He seemed very comfortable in the sunken place. I don't know.
yeah.
But it's not
these,
just the 9 of them. Like they've bought so many, like this throughout the entire Trump era, they installed hundreds of judges, right, Dolio?
yes. But in a lot of in a lot of ways, the first domino to fall was the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Because
to that point, folks have to be vigilant about recognizing and capturing their political power to move forward. Our legislators and government officials to protect these rights that we need. But we also have to make sure that the people that are in office are innovative enough to see these attacks coming and push forward laws and policies that will protect these things despite the attacks that are coming down the pipeline.
Yeah.
yeah, and we also have to make sure that the people that we're electing are vetted. Don't just, not just because they say something cool. Follow what they did before they started running for office.
Yeah.
For
Mhm.
sure.
Because
We
these
definitely get,
people are coming in and then switching sides.
we always, I feel like, get exploited as a voting bloc in general. And, a lot of the Democrats, for example, depend on the Black voting bloc, but then they get elected and, just leave all of our priorities in the wind. I'm to the point where I feel like they're completely complicit because nobody loses that hard, and it's not on purpose. It's like they never follow through with what they promise in the election cycle. Jay, how do you think, this bodes in terms of, like we're saying, the perversion of the courts and also like the separation of church and state upon which this country was supposedly founded? Because a lot of the propaganda is around like these so-called morality. I don't believe they have morality. That's just me. But the sex education banning in schools, the abortion bans, all of it's around their religion, which I thought was separate.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, during the, Dolio mentioned vetting, and during the Supreme Court confirmation process, potential justices are always asked about what role their religion plays in their jurisprudence. And, they always opine sort of vaguely about this, but it's very clear with the new supermajority that religion is playing a significant role, and the writing is there clearly. So I think that we've talked about the Roe versus Wade. We're looking at mifepristone now. These, Jonathan was talking about these decisions that are specifically based on this right to privacy, which are really prime targets for the morality police, for this conservative movement to go after, gay marriage and so on and so forth. So just based on this one judgment alone about the FDA, you could have decisions following up about contraceptions, both the pill and something like a condom or a diaphragm, which are also regulated by the FDA. So if one falls, then everything can fall. Hormone therapy, fertility treatment. So if they want to regulate reproduction, they could do that. It's just, I think that these conservative beliefs are really playing a significant part in pushing policy actions right now. not just on women's health, but also on, anti-LGBTQ actions and everything else. And, Shanice mentioned already that the left is complicit in these actions. I feel like our politicians sometimes, when I feel sort of doom and gloom, that they just get elected so that they can get on the news and make some money from their name, image, and likeness. And the only things that really get done are these sort of extreme, hardcore culture war issues, which are really focused on these morality clauses. So I don't. Those are the things that get people to the polls, unfortunately, and we need to find some way to reverse that.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, we want to get everyone's perspective on the bigger picture, and then we'll have final thoughts. Dr. LaPara, how important is sex education and birth control going to be in the coming years until we figure out how we're going to push back on this assault on civil liberties?
It's going to be critical, and I would tell you, as proud as I am of my state, that the great state of Michigan, this is an area that we need to certainly step up, and to be able to provide sex education, reproductive health education as part of an overall health education strategy is going to be really critical and protective too. Right? Because when we have children who are a vulnerable group, they shouldn't be, but are unfortunately placed in that position, who are also vulnerable to abuse and sexual assault, etc. We know that children that have language and have understanding of human healthy human sexuality, they are less likely to be victimized because they have language. They're able to talk about what's going on. They're able to advocate for themselves. Again, we wish that they're not put in that situation, but this is the reality that we're living with. So looking at it through a robust lens that also includes the fact that arming our children and families with information. Information is power. Knowledge is power. And it's power to do what? To advocate for yourself and others. It's power to change, right? Our community, our society, to create the world that we're looking to create. We cannot do that uninformed. We cannot do that being ignorant. We need our children, our young people to grow into older people that know how their body works, that understand how sex works, that understand what is healthy touch and unhealthy touch, to understand consent, to understand consent, to understand consent and what body autonomy means and looks like, and can articulate that. Because when you're able to do that, you're building someone that is able to be civically engaged in the process of building this better world that we want to build for the sake and benefit of all of us, so we all can thrive. So yes, Jonathan, it's critical that we are pushing to ensure that we have sex education, reproductive health education as part of a comprehensive health education strategy for our children, but frankly, our families. I know adults that don't even know their body parts. So, I mean, we can't have that. We just can't have that, okay? So we have work to be done, and it starts locally and grows from there. Yes.
Delia, how can we protect people's data privacy even as we head into an age where we'll be even more reliant on digital tech? How do we protect each other even in an analog way in terms of these vigilante laws and protecting our individual freedoms?
Honestly, that's a much longer conversation, but
it totally is. But in the context of abortion rights, I guess.
I mean, unfortunately, a lot of these apps that you would find useful for things like tracking your menstruation and your cycles and things like that are, depending on what state you live in, check the laws in your state. If it is one of these repressive states, then delete that app. Don't use it. Be very wary of what your shopping habits are when you're doing things online. Make sure you use a VPN. so that you can,
Like, are we to the point where people are going to have to buy their tampons with cash? You know what I mean? Like, how far does it go?
if you live in Florida, probably.
Probably.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's getting to that point. You're gonna have to be more protective of your data. Um, a lot of online activity is gonna have to be, dialed back. To be honest, it's just that because we know that these people are collecting the data. I know because I'm the person that parses through this data. So that's what it's boiled down to. The privacy is not a thing anymore when it comes to what you do online, because most people are not going to read all of the terms of services.
Right.
The United States laws regarding the data that is collected on you are not as robust as the laws in, say, Europe. In Europe, you have to give consent for every piece of data that is collected on you. Not so much here. You pretty much, as soon as you go into whatever search engine you're in, or if you're using an email provider that you're not paying for, which most people probably are using something like a Gmail or a Yahoo or whatever, the data is being collected. If you're using Gmail, every email that you are exchanging is being parsed for data and being cataloged. That's how they do the predictive search. When you're starting, to type in a thing, and then it just finishes what you're trying to look for, because it already knows that the discussions that you're having. So if you live in one of these states where they are being repressive with their laws in such a manner, you want to be wary of what you're doing, especially if you're in a state like, say, Texas, where someone can basically place a bounty on your head if you're going to seek reproductive care that the state doesn't deem you worthy of.
We're going to have to learn. We're going to have to teach people about VPNs and
Totally.
privacy browsing. In the near future.
Yeah.
I agree. I want to learn.
Especially now, because it's probably not going to be the last vigilante law that gets put in place where your neighbors can turn you in for whatever they decide.
Yeah. Jay, do you think this fight is really about the abortion pill, or is there something more nefarious at play here? And in terms of regulatory bodies like the FDA that we put in place to support the overall checks and balances our justice system is supposed to have, practical implications aside, the move to ban abortion pills is also problematic for separation of powers. If allowed to stand, it would have forced the FDA to violate federal law by pulling a drug from the market without following the mandatory procedures that Congress laid out. What does that mean for the FDA officials and drug makers and their protections? How are regulatory bodies like the FDA and EPA going to protect their authority and integrity through these troubled times?
Yeah, that's well said, Jonathan. And I think the bigger picture here, we've already touched on this. The structural elements of white supremacy have some roadblocks in place, and there is a concerted effort to remove some of those roadblocks so that we can roll back the clock, as we've already discussed. And so, in my view, this recent legal action around the abortion pill is part of a very broad, concerted, and highly effective legal strategy to challenge the authority of the federal government, the executive branch specifically. So the conservative side calls it the administrative state. We're tearing down the administrative state. The last big Supreme Court decision was West Virginia versus the EPA, when the Supreme Court significantly weakened the authority of the EPA to regulate emissions. But the implication was that federal agencies the authority of a federal agency was curtailed dramatically. And that opinion is going to be now propagated into many other cases relevant to other federal agencies like the FDA, like the CDC, like OSHA, which regulate, for instance, coal mining, and FDA, which regulates things around women's health. So these are all part of a concerted strategy to weaken the federal government, to send these decisions back to the states, as we already talked about, where we already have some, Dr. Opara mentioned zombie laws. If you send these things back to the states, a lot of states have either new laws which are enacted by extreme radicals, in preparation for this, or extremely old laws in place from 100 years ago, which are not even relevant for today. So these federal regulations are in place, even in some cases when they're deficient. That's the best we have. And so as those start to become more and more deficient and weakened by this movement, it puts the American public in severe danger, and it puts people of color and marginalized populations at an exponentially higher risk of significant danger.
We're definitely going to be talking about that in an upcoming HoodMed chat that Jay is heading around environmental health justice, because those very protections that were eroded at the EPA are going to impact our communities because they decide where they're going to allow pollution to happen. And it's definitely not where they live. So we're definitely going to be talking more about that in the coming months too. Before we close, we'd love to just get final thoughts from each of you, and you can take a moment to amplify your projects, what you're working on right now, your orgs. We'll start with you, Dr. Opara. You want to tell us about AI art and everything that's going on with you?
Oh my God, how much time do we have?
All the time you want.
No, thank you for sharing. So it is my honor to be founder and creator of the Anti-Racism in Action Roundtable, and which is AI Art or A-Art, as a partner of Hood Medicine. It has been just a beautiful partnership. And so AI Art is the community of anti-racist leaders in healthcare and public health. But frankly, at this point, we have expanded to include multiple other fields and disciplines and professions, because it's an all hands on deck thing. And our mission is to dismantle white supremacism and anti-Blackness in healthcare and public health, to eliminate health disparities and bring about health justice and health equity. It is an all hands on deck. It is all disciplines on deck, addressing those structural and social determinants of health, addressing issues and how it all relates back to the health outcomes of Black peoples, so that we can create a society where Black people thrive in our brilliance, our collective brilliance and beauty and genius. So we're tearing down, but we're also creating, this better world. So we meet on a bi-weekly basis on YouTube and streaming on YouTube and Twitter and app. We're working to build out a podcast that's in process right now, and as well as some other projects to do with that. Certainly you can reach out to me on Twitter at INNODIM. That is at INNODIM on Twitter or Instagram to connect, and certainly can get you on the listserv so that you can be up to date with our shenanigans and the good trouble we stay getting into. We have, speaking of the FDA, we have discussed and worked on calling them out as it relates to how devices that are approved by the FDA have disparate or differential effects when it comes to folks who have browner skin. So, for example, the pulse oximetry device, which is used to measure amounts of oxygen, well, it doesn't detect. It's not very reliable in terms of detecting the correct amount of oxygen when you are a browner skinned person. Mm-hmm. And this is something we've known for decades. Now, think about how that induced disparities during COVID, where the amount of oxygen you had was used to determine if you got admitted to the hospital, if you got admitted to the ICU, if you got help with supplemental oxygen, ventilation, and death. And so there's a lot of work that we're doing, identifying where are the grains and the seeds of white supremacism that have been codified in healthcare and in public health that lead to and contribute to cause, drive disparities. How do I name them, root them out, dismantle them, and build better? So that's the AI art community. And we work hand in hand with Hood Medicine and many other partners to accomplish this mission. Also wear a lot of hats here in the city of Detroit and around the world because we work in global Blackness space. So when it comes to the continent of Africa, the Caribbean, and seeing how our shared experience, our collective experience is needed to build that, again, global village to uplift our concerns when it comes to health, wellness, and other related topics. So I want to thank you for holding space, Dr. Hodson. This was a fantastic space. I learned so much. Jay, Dolio, Jonathan, just I was taking notes furiously, learning so many things. I hope that we continue this conversation. And my closing thought will be that, democracy is a fragile thing. Even the idea of it is a fragile thing. And even ironically, His Royal Highness Ronald Reagan
so mad at you. I'm mad.
When he was governor in California, was like, freedom, it is a fragile thing. And we're always one generation away from it being extinct. But he was right. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. So he was right in that sense, that it is a fragile thing, but it is a fragile thing. And so we must, to the best of our ability within our context, understanding that not all of us have the same amount of privileges, but whatever our context is, figure out what level of participation that we can engage in politically, because these things, they disappear, and Black folks know this all too well. Nothing is secure. You have to stay vigilant and hyper vigilant in our voting, in the holding, in the engagement, in the holding accountable. It is so critical, and we have to understand that it's all related. It's all related to health. If some shit is going down in education space, it's going to show up in health. If some shit is going down in food, it's going to show up in health. If it's going down in entertainment, it's going to show up in health. It's all related. So we have to have that lens of connection, connectivity, intersectionality as we engage politically and civically on whatever level, from the local to the national. So again, I'm looking forward to continuing to build community. And thank you for this opportunity.
You're welcome. Board, HoodMed board. I guess, Jay, we'll start with you. Do you have any closing thoughts, anything you want to pub before we go?
Yeah, I think I'll just repeat what you said earlier. We're working on the environmental health justice podcast about the Rubbertown neighborhood in Louisville. So look for that coming up in the near future. We're very excited to work with our colleagues at the University of Louisville on putting together some really interesting programming. So it's going to be very cool and coming up soon. So I just want to repeat what Dolio said earlier, call to action. The best thing to do here is to get involved, and the first step is the most important. Even if you don't know necessarily where to start or what to do or what your talent is, the first step is just to find out who your representative is and send them a message. Hit them up on Twitter. Go to a town meeting for city council. Engagement is really critical. So encourage everybody to get engaged and be the change you want to see here, because that's what it's going to take to countervail some of these huge pressures that are pushing to the right.
Yeah, we're definitely going to need to build the resistance, and we're already starting way behind the 8 ball. Yeah. Dolio, final thoughts?
Yeah, just reiterate it. everything is political.
Yeah.
Everything is political. Science, technology, education, health, environment, everything is political because there's somebody making those policy decisions that influence what all those things are doing. Um, like Jay said before, do it. You don't have to do much. Just do something.
Mhm.
Just get involved at the local level because every massive problem you see at the federal level started somewhere at the local level. They all had to work their way up that chain before they got to that big pot where they're crapping down on everyone.
Yeah.
Um, Other than that, just want to send a shout out to the Western State Center, the Braver Angels, and Oxfam.
Cool. Jonathan?
I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. To thank our listeners for tuning in to this episode of Let's Get Vaccinated on Hood Med Chats, hosted with our friends from March of Science. At Hood Medicine, we bring you real talk and mad science so you can make the right decisions to keep your loved ones safe. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to support our effort, donate to our cause, or find out about our next events. Visit hoodmedicine.org or find us on social media at hood_medicine on IG, Twitter, Linktree, and TikTok. Hood Medicine Initiative, all one word, on Facebook. You can also support us through Bonfire at our Gorilla Gear merch shop. And be sure to come through to listen to our expert scientists, physicians, hackers, and assorted geeks on Routine Checkup with Hood Medicine every Monday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern on the Lurie Daniel Favors Show on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126. Thank you again. Stay safe, get vaccinated and boosted, and remember, we all we got.
Show. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.